Okay, so this is just a quick announcement, and it's just going to talk about the presentations. If you've been reading the syllabus, if you've read the rubric, if you viewed the sample presentation, there probably won't be much new here, but there's been some confusion about how to do the presentations, and let me say how not to do a presentation, and it's to spend 3 or 4 minutes on a summary and say that's my presentation, or to say like there's this one character and they're like this and that makes me feel bad. There's this one character and I can't pronounce their name, so I tried. This is a presentation you're supposed to teach people about the story and different interpretations of the story. So if I go to the syllabus, I'm just going to read it off straight from what I have here. And it says discussion leader. During the semester, you will sign up to present a particular author on the first meeting of the week in which we discuss that author. You can use a variety of methods to get to your purpose, but you are asked to lead a discussion on that author and the work by that author we've read. You will provide a narrated PowerPoint of no less than 10 minutes in length, a time frame which should not include video or audio of others. If you can't get to 10 minutes, you haven't done enough research. So with the narrative PowerPoint, I'm not really holding hard and fast on that, but I'm just not entirely sure how you can share sources or discuss a story just with a webcam pointed at you. And remember earlier on, many of you who had signed up for this class at the end of last semester received an email from me, and then also at the beginning of this semester saying you might want to find out how to do narrated PowerPoints. So from there, I can also go to the rubric, which is also online. And there's a rubric that's broken down into 5 categories, and it says engagement, interaction. Did you get asked questions? Did you have a clear plan for what students are supposed to take away from your discussion? In other words, do you have a point? And just kind of going, well, there's this person, and then they did this, and then they made me feel like this, and then I felt bad about that, and then there's this thing that happened, and it made me feel like this, and I just didn't know what to think about that. That doesn't really do anything. That's not really a discussion. That's just you talking about yourself and how you feel about things. So that's the first domain. You need to give people ideas on what to talk about. The knowledge, how much did you know about your topic? Just kind of summarizing the story. We don't really need to hear that because we've all read the story. And so if we've all read the story, probably one of the last things that we want to worry about is sitting through a 4 or 5 minute presentation on someone telling us what happened in the story. So what you need to do is, as you think about your presentation, think about angles into the story. What arguments are you going to present? And that's where one of the other rubric domains comes in, where you're asked to cite sources. And you can say, okay, this is the story I'm doing. Here's one argument about it. And if you take a look at the sample presentation, that should be pretty right there. I mean, there's one slide that's a quick summary, and I would even say that Alan, who gave us that sample presentation, spent a little too long on the summary. He spent about a minute on it. And then from there he says, okay, this critic said this, and there's symbolism about this, and this critic said this, okay? And kind of went through and said, okay, here are different interpretations of the short story. How do they fit into American culture? How do they fit into American literature? And then discussion, basically discussing that stuff. Not how you feel about it, but things that tie into the overall research behind this. Dynamism is another category. Were you interesting? And a part of that is if you're just telling us how you feel about the story, I think that's fine that you have feelings about the story. But it's not terribly interesting to listen to somebody give a summary of a story when everybody's already read it, right? And so we've already lived the story. We've already seen the story. Let's just kind of move on to the stuff that we don't know, which would be the critical interpretation, the discussions, the arguments, all of that stuff. Along the way, you have materials. Of course, there aren't any handouts for this class, but if you wanted to upload a document, I guess you could. But really, the materials thing is asking about the PowerPoints again. And it says, do you have a minimum of 3 sources that are peer-reviewed and match or buttress your assertions? Okay. In other words, where are those sources? And so, again, just kind of going and talking about the story and how you feel about it isn't really academic in nature. It's not advanced college material. The discussion board is, if you're doing your regular discussion board post, that's perfectly fine in terms of answering the questions that I'm giving you. But just like this is the story and this is how I feel about it, isn't really going in depth in terms of what the story means, what its potential is in that time period, all sorts of things. And so again, it's on the rubric itself. It's asking for a minimum of 3 cited sources that are peer reviewed. So that's in 2 different places now. It's on the rubric and it's on the syllabus. And if you go to under the assignments tab as well, if you take a look at Alan's sample presentation, which I uploaded because there was some confusion about it, that also walks you through what the presentation should look like, how you should sound, what you should do. It doesn't necessarily need to be completely scripted, but it also shouldn't be completely ad-libbed. If you think about your communication classes, how well did you do on an assignment where you just stood up there and said, yeah, there's this thing I read, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and well, that's my presentation. Probably didn't do too well. And so then also if you go to the announcements page, there's a 4th item in which I talk about the presentation. It's called More About the Presentation. And so I say, number 1, the point of the exercise is to have you critically examine a work and express it in such a way that others can follow your argument easily. You can do it in a variety of ways, including asking specific questions to promote discussion, or by picking a specific critical lens to employ. And so all of that is there, and again, if you take a look at the sample presentation, if you look at the syllabus, if you take a look at the assignments tab, all of that stuff is in there repeated as well. And then also, you need to show me in the class that you read and understood the story. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to recite it verbatim, okay? Now, what you could do is pull out quotes from the story. That would actually be very helpful. And so you could say on page 90, whatever, this person said this. And that's important because our critic has said blah, blah, blah. Or the argument about this story is that it talks about women and how they're represented in 1920s America, okay? Well, here's a quote that says, how women are related in 1920s America. So it's just like a big argument. And then again, point 3, reference materials. Okay, I'm saying that, you have to give them to us with citations. They have to have a specific purpose for being shared, and you just can't Google random stuff. Okay, I'm just reading directly off of this at this point in time. And so I'm trying not to be too overly irritated, I guess, but I know there are questions about the presentation. There's questions about the discussion board as well. But really, the presentation is discussed in 4 different places. You've got a sample presentation, you've got the syllabus, you've got the announcements page, and you've got the rubric. Okay, so check all of that stuff out if you haven't already. And if you're uploading a presentation that's like, yeah, this is how I feel about it, and here's this character, and I don't know anything about him, I just read it on that sort of stuff, that's not a presentation. It's not a presentation. I don't want to sound like Allen Iverson, and we're talking about practice here. But, it's not a presentation if you're doing that. A presentation is polished. It gets people to understand the story. It produces additional material for which they can understand the story. You give them sources. You back up your assertions. You provide an argument. It's not just a webcam of you talking about how you feel. Okay? And so the presentation material is all there, okay? And if you read it and understand it, and you've gone through it, and you've already started putting together everything, I'm sorry this was kind of redundant, but hopefully from here on out, we won't have as many questions about the presentations because it's all there. It's been there since day 1, and actually it's been there before that because I sent out emails to everybody talking about needing to know how to do narrated PowerPoints. Now, if you don't understand how to do narrated PowerPoints, that's perfectly fine, okay? But then you've got to figure out a way to have a focused discussion using just your webcam, and then also maybe uploading a document that has the sources that you have cited in the discussion. So you would say, according to Miller, who wrote this in 1993, he says this. And then when I open up the document, it should have that stuff in there. So if you're not completely familiar with narrated PowerPoint, I'm not going to freak out about that, but the length, 10 minutes, is still there, okay? So a lot of students have automatically gone to a PowerPoint because it's a little bit easier to meter out your time and you don't ramble as much. And so again, this is just informational stuff again about the presentation. This will be 5 things now about the presentation and how you're supposed to do it. So if there's any confusion, again, feel free to email me. But if you're emailing me and you haven't checked this stuff out already, I don't know what else I can add. And so once you've gone through all of this and you've seen this video and you've read the rubric and you've read the announcements and you've read the assignment description and you've watched the sample presentation and you've gone through all that and you still have questions, feel free to email me and let me know. But really, everybody at this point in time should be taking a look at your story. You should be looking at sources. You should be thinking about putting together a narrated PowerPoint. And then you should be ready to go on Monday of that particular week that you're assigned. And so just kind of keep all of that stuff in mind. Everybody's doing a good job on discussion boards so far. But when you're doing a presentation, you've got to do a little bit more. You've got to actually be the teacher and tell everybody how to do or how to interpret different things within the story.